Hello and welcome everyone to the Three Principles Global Community webinar. The Three Principles Global Community, also known as 3PGC, is a nonprofit organization that's committed to bringing an understanding of the three principles to people throughout the world. You can learn more about the Three Principles Global Community at their website, 3pgc.org. Today, we have Francesco Barbera with us. Francesco is a Harvard-trained corporate and social enterprise lawyer and a Three Principles practitioner based in Long Beach, California. Francesco, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining us on this wintry day. And well, I'm excited to share. I'm glad it's a hey, Steve. Good of you to join us. So Bonnie asked me to give this webinar after she heard the talk that I gave at the conference in Los Angeles just a couple of months ago. And in that conference, I was on a panel talking about, the theme of the panel was change when it seems impossible. And what I shared about was the difficulty that I was having in my dating life, and the patterns that I was in my dating life, and how it wasn't until really the three principles came along in my life that I was able to gain some elevation on the patterns, because I'd been studying them and working on them and using all kinds of psychological techniques and so forth, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But it was really the three principles that made the difference from being kind of at the whim of these patterns and sort of helpless over them, to them just really not being a factor as much, and not standing in the way of me having the kinds of relationships that I wanted, and ultimately that led to the relationship with my now wife flourishing, and us becoming engaged and getting married and having our first child. And so it's been a really meaningful journey. So I'm going to share a little bit about that kind of transformation with you, and the insights that really made a difference for me. And then I thought I would just share one or two points about what I have observed from my own experience that I see other people kind of struggling with as well, and in the hopes that it'll make a difference in all of our lives, and those in your life that you touch. So my intention in preparing this before this was really to take that talk, and I kind of wanted to distill it down to what is, if I had to kind of distill it all down to one key insight that was most helpful to me, what would that insight be? And that's what I'm hoping to share. So, wind back the clock to I would say about 5 or 10 years ago or so, and I was an overthinker, you could say. I had a lot of analysis going on about my life, and about how to make my life work, about being successful, about was I doing well, was I taking advantage of all the opportunities available to me, and so forth, and that translated in my dating life and relationship life to a lot of overthinking as well, and so when I'd get into a relationship, I would, immediately or very quickly start thinking about, is this a good relationship? Is this the right person for me? Can I, I would start tabulating flaws, and I'd get filled with insecurity about whether to move forward or not. Is this the right decision? And so we'd have so my dating life, what it would look like is I'd go on a date, we'd have a nice time, it would be pleasant, it'd be fun, And then I'd have an ebb where I'd be like filled with doubt and insecurity, and so and these low kind of these low and insecure thoughts seemed really meaningful to me. Like, gosh, this can't possibly be the right relationship. Otherwise, there's no way I would be having these kinds of thoughts and this kind of experience in relationship. I mean, if this is the right person, then clearly my mind would be filled with pure positivity all the time, and I'd be like all green lights and super excited about going forward. There's no way that I would have these kinds of doubts, you know? And so I'd get really freaked out by my lows. You know, I'd get really concerned about them. I thought that they were indicators of whether this was the right person for me. I thought they were indicators of, is this a healthy relationship? And so the sort of byproduct of that, and so naturally I would go from relationship to relationship, you know. I'd get into a relationship and then I'd have this internal struggle, and I would keep the relationship in a kind of lukewarm place, you know, where I'd be like in, but then I'd be out. I'd be like, maybe I should give it another chance. And then I'd have these thoughts again. And so there was a lot of lukewarmness and ambivalence. My relationships didn't go anywhere because I was I had too much trepidation about them going anywhere. I didn't know if I could deal with these doubts, or if these doubts were an indication, insecurity was an indication that I ought to, you know, kind of take more time to really think about it. So that's what I was doing for a long time, I would say, in my 20s and even, you know, a lot of my 30s. And then at some point I realized, like, well, this is kind of crazy. As I got into my mid 30s and everyone around me was kind of settled down, getting married and having kids. And I really wanted that for myself. Like I really wanted to be in a happy, you know, marriage, and I wanted to have a family, and, you know, and here I was, it's like, at first I thought it was, I'm just not meeting the right people. And then I kind of got clued into the fact that maybe, you know, it had something to do with the way that I was being in relationship. So I started to look inward, and I did not know the three principles at that time. I knew, you know, I was looking towards psychology and spirituality in general, to, you know, examine my patterns and my beliefs and my past. And so I started, you know, a more intensive reading, and I enrolled in this master's program in psychology, you know, all really in an effort to understand what it was about me that was preventing me from being in a good, healthy, committed relationship. And, you know, the interesting about that is that when I looked in that direction, I found a lot. You know, like I found a lot of limiting beliefs. I found like that my patterns matched what a lot of books were saying about attachment disorders and love avoidance. You know, I was like, oh, geez, wow. I mean, there's diagnoses for this, you know. So in a way, I was kind of like comforted, like I'm not like there's a name for this. But at the same time, I was kind of I don't know, a little bit discouraged, you know, because I was doing so much inner work, and it didn't really seem to be making much of a difference. I mean, it was helpful, and I won't say, you know, it was certainly helpful to a degree, but at least, you know, in this area of relationships, it was like, um, I was still struggling, you know, I was still experiencing the same experience. So it was around this time that a friend of mine from my psychology coaching world gave me the Relationship Handbook by George Pransky. And I don't know how many of you have read that, but it's like it's this unassuming, thin, brilliant book. and it really shook me to my core, because the essence of that book was like, what I took away from that book was that uh, thought or consciousness, or we as human beings, we have an ebb and flow in our experience of consciousness. And that ebb and flow is completely universal and natural to human beings. And when we ebb, when we go down in our level of consciousness, the way that we see reality is colored through those lenses. And so our life looks difficult. The people that we're in relationship look difficult. We're filled with insecurity. We're filled with fears and anxieties, and it can be, unless we know what's happening, it could seem like there's a ton of work we need to do in order to fix our life. And then when we're in a flow period, when our consciousness goes up a little bit, then we're in a flow period, and all of those problems seem to become much less significant, and we get more charitable and more compassion. We're filled with more compassion and understanding. We're much more connected to people, and things are just a lot easier. And so I realized that these ebbs and flows that I would experience in my relationship were not at all an indicator of something that I needed to fix or solve. It was just an indicator of just being human. And I would say that the key insight there was that when I would be in a low state of mind and I saw all that difficulty, I would just believe it all. It was all very real and very compelling to me. So, but this is true not only in relationship, but in life in general. But in relationship, as I was talking about before, so I would have, let's say, a nice time with someone, and then maybe the next time I saw them, I wouldn't like XYZ behavior of theirs, or I'd get really hung up on something that I was troubled about, like, whoa, what does this mean? And I took that really seriously. It really sidetracked my relationships, because I was very caught up with the significance of these observations. I really believed in that it was important for me to be very conscious and mindful of of who I was becoming involved with, But after learning the three principles and gaining an understanding of the three principles, I began to see that those observations were not about the person. They were about me and where my state of consciousness was at that time. So all of my kind of critical and insecure and judgmental perceptions I became much more skeptical about them. They seemed less real to me and less reliable to me. And in short, I became a lot more cautious and skeptical about acting from from those kinds of observations, and much more inclined to just hang in there and wait for my observations to change and see what would come through when my consciousness was in a different place, So it was kind of shortly after this that I met the woman that's now my wife, Carolyn, and in our first date, we had what could only be described as a wonderful first date. It was one of those long dates. We went from place to place and conversing the entire time, and getting to know each other. We had a nice meal, and we went to a bar and had drinks. We walked around Santa Monica. It was really lovely. And as our relationship went from date to date, I was having this similar experience. It was like in my mind, I would have the ebbs, um, and I would get fearful and anxious, and I'd kind of like need to take a step back. But the difference was that I knew better. Like I knew that I oughtn't let these ebbs uh, sidetrack my relationships, you know, and I didn't need to believe believe them entirely. So, and you know, I kind of like started trying to like look past them a little bit and see what was really in front of me when my state of mind was better. And what I found was that, you know, in a from that place, Carolyn and I had a really nice relationship. We had a nice time together. She was just delightfully positive and fun, and and she had a kind of innocence and a real purity in how in what she was bringing to my life and our relationship. Now, and I would also have, um, you know, thoughts that were critical of those exact qualities, and and questions about that. Um, but the only difference was the only difference is that I had this modicum of skepticism about what I was seeing from those places. I just had humility uh, about uh, uh, you know, about my own ability to see clearly from a lower level of consciousness, so to speak. And so what so what happened then was that, you know, because I was no longer so freaked out by the ebbs in my thinking. I was no longer taking myself out of the game, so to speak. I was no longer withdrawing every time I had uh, an insecure thought about my relationship. I just was in it. I was involved. I stayed in the game. I didn't. Uh, I stayed in the game is the wrong word. In other words, I kept loving, and I stayed present, and I stayed involved in the relationship, and it built, and it grew, um, and it went from, you know, dating to serious dating to engagement and marriage and so forth. And you know, that entire time, that the ebb and flow experience didn't change. I mean, in fact, it's gotten, you know, it's gotten worse in periods of time, because I myself am on a major learning curve about this. See, because it's not like um, you know, that skepticism that I'm talking about it's not like I have that all the time, and it's not like it's present for me all the time. Sometimes I'm swept up in it and living in it, and sometimes I'm doing that for weeks at a time. But always in the back of my mind, I know that that the potential exists, that it is innate for the mind to reset itself and restore itself into balance, and for us to come back into well-being, and for our perspective to become more expansive and more more loving. And so even in the depths of the downs, I have that, Carolyn and I have that going for us in our marriage, that we know there is this resilience, and because of this resilience, we know there's, you know, the downs aren't as troubling to us. You know, the downs aren't as scary, because we know that there is this human potential to bounce back and come into a place of warmth and loving, you know. And that is, you know, that is an amazing thing to know, which is that the loving that connects us as human beings is there. It's present. It's not something that we need to create. It is something that we return to when our mind kind of clears itself and resets itself and brings us into well-being. So anyway, so that is really like the essence of the insight that I had that really made the difference. It was the shift from getting freaked out by my downs and getting sidetracked by them and believing them, to being more skeptical about them and a little bit more open to seeing things differently and letting new insights kind of come in, that enabled me to just stay in a relationship long enough for it to flourish and grow and deepen into something that's been really meaningful to me. And this, this very same kind of orientation, or this same lesson, I took into every relationship, including the relationship, for example, with my work and with my family. I mean, the same sort of phenomena had been sidetracking my experience all of my life. Like in work, the way it would show up is that I would get I'd have a lot of thinking about, is this the right step that I'm taking? Should I go to the left or should I go to the right? Is this the right career choice for me? And I would get really preoccupied with that kind of overthinking and use of the intellect and trying to navigate and figure things out. And then the three principles helped me to see that was just a reflection of kind of insecurity that I could just really I didn't have to pay much attention to it, because there's this deeper propulsion, this deeper energy behind life where I could just throw myself into life, and into my work and into whatever I was doing. And then that a natural kind of intelligence would sort of help me sort things out. I didn't need to figure anything out. And I didn't need to do a lot of analysis and thinking and planning. I could just be present in my life, and we have this innate responsive intelligence that when we show up with a clear and open mind, it really enables us. We don't even need a clear and open mind. It's just when we show up in presence in life, we have that going for us, and I think that is, if there was one thing that I would share to daters, like people that were in, my position a few years ago, that the thing that I learned that was absolutely most helpful to me is just that we have this capacity to really, it's just to show up, and with a full heart, and a willingness to kind of be open and have fun and be loving and be all in with all the time and with everyone. I know. I don't know if that sounds crazy, and I think I'll open it up to questions a little bit, but I'll just kind of end by saying, like, there's this weird, I think, in the self-help world around dating and relationships, I feel like a great deal of emphasis on the intellect, like on choosing the right mate and being really mindful about what qualities you're looking for, and not settling and being empowered in relationship. And I see a lot of that, and I don't know. I mean, I'm very skeptical of that approach. I would say, I would say that I would toss my own feeling is that really leads people in the wrong direction. Like, that you don't really want to be analyzing things. You don't want to be overthinking things, and you don't want to be living your romantic life, or really your any part of your life, from that kind of like analytical intellectual intellect. That is, that's not the driver. That's just a tool, and the driver is this life force that we have, this deeper intelligence, that when we engage from that place with all of life, we get our answers, we get deeper connection, we get enjoyment, we get all the goodness that life has to offer, and without compromising on like on quality, or this doesn't mean like settling or anything like that. Our intelligence takes all of that into consideration, so we don't have to worry about choosing the right mate. That is, I really question whether our intellect has that capability better than our innate wisdom. So anyway, those are some those are the reflections I really wanted to share on this call, and I don't know if there are questions. I would love to hear them, and I'm not sure how this is landing with the crowd.
I just want to remind everyone that you can unmute yourself by scrolling the cursor down into the bottom left-hand corner.
Francesco.
Hi, Steve.
How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
It's a delight to be part of this. So I'm curious about something you said earlier about the as you watched yourself in relationship move into judgment.
Yeah.
So could you speak to that as it relates to the three principles in relationship to hypervigilance and being overly cautious in that regard?
Can you say more about that? Hypervigilant, overly cautious?
Yeah, you mentioned analytical, and you mentioned when I'm dating or in a prospective relationship, I find myself quite often thinking about it as a long-term possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And the short-term spontaneity sort of leaves the room when I start moving my thought patterns in that direction.
Right. Yeah.
Mostly because I'm really not interested in short-term. So I think through that lens, or I feel in through that lens. And I'm just curious what your thoughts might be, because you started to head down there, and I was very taken with that.
Yeah, 100%, Steve. And I was, I was very much the same way, and I would, get into a dating relationship, and then start, my thinking would start going into the future, and how this person fit into the future, and did she have the right qualities, and sure enough, I would freak myself out completely. Because there was just, it's like if you're looking in that direction, you're bound to find something, because unless you're not going to date a human being, it's like, and so I caught, that's what I'm saying is I noticed that that's what I was doing. I was freaking myself out by having so much thinking, or I should say that my thinking was really freaking me out. This tendency that I had, for whatever reason, to get really analytical and insecure about my choices and decisions, would really trouble and concern me. And I believed that with the right woman, like, or in the right relationship, that I wouldn't have that thought pattern. In other words, that the sign of a good relationship was having having doubt-free thinking and no insecure thinking. And I waited, decades for that person to come around that would obliterate my my thought patterns, but that is not how it worked. It's only when I got wind of the way that I was getting freaked out by my own thought patterns that I could set them aside, view them with some skepticism, understand that I was getting carried away with my own thinking, and look past my own thinking into the truth of the relationship, and then not getting fearful of getting carried by the energy of life into this deeper relationship, So as I did this more with my now wife, our relationship naturally got deeper. It got more serious. It progressed. And that led to insecure thinking on my part as well. And that was more thinking that I just had to kind of set aside and see what was going on. And so in a way, the main difference between my relationship with Carolyn and my past relationships was that and Carolyn, and this is, I don't mean to say like this, Carolyn is amazing, and my relationship wouldn't have flourished without her and her wonderful qualities, right? But the big difference is that I didn't explode and sabotage my own relationships out of fear and based on my insecure thoughts. It was like, see, in the past, I would have positive experience in thinking, and then I would share that with my partner. And then I would have an ebb experience of insecurity, and I would share that with my partner too. Either I would withdraw, or I would express something critical, or something that would just kind of throw the relationship into a state of uncertainty and doubt. And so the goodwill and warmth, it was always on a low burn, because they never knew where they stood, and I never knew where I stood. And so it just stayed, lukewarm, But with Carolyn, since I didn't get freaked out by my own ebbs and insecurities as much, I was able to make them part of my own process, and not act on them. And instead, when I was with Carolyn, I would just be giving and to the best of my ability. I would be participating. I would be making plans. I would be, not sabotaging, but instead building and growing the relationship. And that, the great thing about that is that really, when we show up in that way, when we take ownership of our own insecurities and don't project them or blame others, like, I don't know, that we get the best in other people too. I think that being with someone that wasn't critical and being, and doubtful and withdrawing and I think really helped Carolyn to be secure and to show up in her full self as well. And that also added to our relationship. So is that helpful, Steve? Steve, you're on mute. I wanted to just know if I answered your question.
I think he's frozen.
I think he is too, yeah. I hope he heard some of that. Are there other questions? Well, I'm not seeing any right now. So let me just I just wanted to take a minute to share, this kind of like the ebb experience and what that's like for me and Carolyn now that we are married. I just want to say, like, we have, I think that what the three principles, I think in my spiritual life, I was really looking for a way to transcend the experience of being human and all the downs of being human and all of the struggles of being human, so to speak. And, you know, and I thought that the end of spirituality would be a state of kind of a transhuman peace, a transcendence from the ups and downs of life. And what I have found is that it is that, but not at all in the way that I thought. Like Carol and I have all the same squabbles and fights that I think every other married couples have about, like, we fight about in-laws, and we have difficulties with the housework, and, you know, who's doing what around the house, and is the house neat and clean, and so forth. And I get really caught up in my own, you know, downs in my marriage. I'm still like completely on a learning curve about that. But what I have learned is that when I'm in a state of constriction, and in a state of judgment, or in a state of struggle or righteousness, I shared that I've learned to be just a little bit skeptical of where I'm coming from when I'm in that state, because I know, like, you know, when I'm in that state and I'm attributing it to Carolyn, or I'm blaming Carolyn, or I'm blaming whatever else I'm blaming in life for those feelings, I get more of the same. It kind of like gets perpetuated, right? I vent my frustrations. I get that back from Carolyn, and it just doesn't go anywhere except in this just sort of like endless circle. It just stays in place, basically. And then, you know, by the grace of God, I remember, you know, I just remember, like, this is just a state of mind I'm in. This is just me losing my bearings. Has nothing to do with Carolyn. And that kind of has the effect of, it's like popping a bubble. It's like popping a balloon. And I look inward I look inward, and what happens then is that insights come that smooth out the experience. That is, like, when we lose our bearings and have the awakening or insight that we've lost our bearings, the mind then resets us to well-being. And what happens as that happens is it gives us insights that are in the direction of love, in the direction of reconciliation, gratitude, appreciation, seeing things from someone else's point of view. That part of our innate well-being is an extraordinary ability to be in a state of deep connectedness with other people. And if we're in a state of disconnection, it's not a sign that we're actually disconnected. It's just a sign that we're overthinking. It's a reflection of our level of consciousness, and there's nothing that we need to do about that, you know, because of innate well-being, because of this inherent corrective capacity that the mind has of restoring itself to balance. And that's pretty amazing. I mean, that is just such a helpful gift that we have, and it's so helpful in relationships, because relationship is a place where it's really easy to lose your bearings. For me, I mean, I should say for me, you know, because of my own learning curve, and I'm relatively young, you know, I'm like 4 years into the principles. So, no, we're all on a kind of lifelong journey. So I still get very much caught up in the content of the ebbs, right? In the content uh, of the things that seem to be causing the tension, in the temporary tension in a relationship. Like all that content seems really compelling to me, and that needs to be dealt with, right? Until I have the insight and the self-corrected capacity kind of kicks in, and then I kind of and then I see what's been happening, and I feel warmth towards Carolyn again, and I see what an ass I've been. I see that I've been such a, you know, overbearing, and I suddenly I can see all the wonderful things that Carolyn does for our baby, and all those, the mind gives me all these things to bring me back into a state of connectedness and warmth with Carolyn and that is an amazing thing. It's just an amazing kind of corrective capacity that we have going for us, that we just need to know that it's there, and that gives us permission to sort of take our foot off the gas pedal, so to speak, and let the overthinking settle, and let the insights flow in, and the connection and empathy come in, and we get to experience that goodness. Is that helpful to people?
Just want to remind everybody, if you have any questions or you want to say anything, if you roll your cursor down into the bottom left-hand corner, there's a little microphone. You can just click on that to unmute yourself. I really love everything that you're saying. I'm glad that you agreed to do this webinar, and that I heard you talk at the conference, because I didn't know what your experience was. I hadn't heard you talk about this before. I'm kind of curious. So was Carolyn involved? Was Carolyn aware of the 3 principles, or did you share with her that?
Yeah. So yeah, she was not, when we started dating, she was not, but relatively early in our relationship, we went to a program that Michael Neal was giving with George Pransky in Santa Monica. So it was just an evening seminar. And we went together, and I think she was really taken with it. And over time, she has gotten more and more involved in learning the principles. And it's really made a difference, I think. And more recently, she just started coaching with Kara Stambach at Pransky and Associates. She just started doing her one-on-one coaching, and so it's, you know, it's just a wonderful journey. This awakening into the nature of the human experience, so incredibly helpful to us as. It's a great direction to be looking in.
I don't know if you can see the chat. Steve came back on. He said, sorry,
Okay.
off here in Hawaii.
Oh yeah, Steve, I hope
Sorry.
you got to hear, at least, did you get to hear some of the answer?
Almost all of it. I think you were just wrapping up when I lost my connection. You know, I'm trading beautiful spaces for lousy connectivity.
That's a good trade.
Yeah.
Well, I hope I answered. You know, my answer was sort of helpful or responsive.
Very helpful, and thank you for it.
Sure, absolutely. Well, look, Any other questions? Come on, surely you could think of something. Well, then, I would love to hear if anything stands out to you in what I've shared. Oh, Steve, you have another question? Yeah, go for it.
I understand the three principles, or maybe it's better said this way. If you were to take the question I asked about relationship and reluctance and hypervigilance and judgment and all that, and place it into the simple process of the three principles, can you use like a real world experience around that tendency and then drop it into the sort of three principles algorithm and explain it through that lens?
Well, I guess I don't think that the three principles has an algorithm or a process. I mean, it's really just what I would say is that it's an understanding of how our moment to moment experience is being created and that is the formless becoming formed through us, through the three principles, which are mind, consciousness, and thought. So,
right, exactly. So just to understand it through that sort of mind, consciousness, and thought distinctions. That's really what I was trying to get at, if that's possible.
Let's see. What is behind that question? What do you?
Well, I'm trying to bring it into a sort of real world experience of sitting at a dinner date, having a lovely exchange, feeling myself start to process, oh wow, she's really interesting. And then I start moving down the roadmap of 10 years down the road or 5 years, whatever I do to exhaust the moment and turn it into a long-term analysis.
Right.
I'm just trying to see that through what are the distinctions happening in mind, in consciousness and spirit, or is it not possible to express it through that lens?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it would be helpful to parse it like that. I mean, because the way that we, the way we experience, the way that our reality is created through mind, consciousness, and thought, it's just one reality that's being created in the moment through. And so, I mean, I could kind of explicate on how I understand the three principles, but I don't know that it would necessarily be helpful to. But let me just pause for a second and think about what you've asked here. I mean, I think the essence of it, Steve, is that, is that our life is being created from, in our experience of life, is coming from inside of us, not from outside of us. Okay, and so, like in the example you gave of sitting at the dinner table with someone, that's an example that I've done that quite a bit in the past, and my mind would get filled with thoughts just the same way as yours, and I would attribute what was happening to the person sitting in front of me, and to circumstances or other circumstances, and the three principles helped me to understand that there's no causal link between the experience that I have of life and the circumstances outside of myself. That is, the formless energy behind life comes into form through us, through thought. Thought is that creative principle, the link between the formless and the form. Consciousness is what makes us aware of thought becoming form. And mind is the sort of intelligence that's animating all of it.
Thank you for that. That's a lot to ponder. As you were talking, I downloaded the Kindle version of George's book, which I look forward to diving into while I'm here.
Oh, that's great, Steve. It's a great book. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know. Let me know your response to it.
Thank you.
So I see, where is everybody located? Is anyone calling in from?
Can you see Jenny is from Sweden?
Oh, great. Oh, cool. Hey, Jenny. Is it cold in Sweden?
Hi, I just wanted to join the conversation. I'm calling from Salt Spring Island.
Salt Spring Island? Oh,
Yeah.
that's, wow.
Yeah, I was
You're
at
like
the
you're ground zero, three principles.
Yeah, and it's amazing how on Salt Spring Island it's not really that well known about. So I'm slowly trying to spread the word to people I know. And I was at the school in November, so that was amazing.
Oh, that sounds great.
But yeah, I'm just, I'm not sure where I want to go if this is a question or just commenting on what you've been saying. And I think the big struggle for me is still the fact that there's nothing to do. Just wanting to have that, that, okay, if this happens, then do this. So like again, in the situation where, say you're having dinner with someone and you're having all these crazy thoughts. Like once you had the understanding of the principles, is it just something that happens naturally, or you would just, you would still have those dates that, just like the whole night would sort of go in a certain direction because of the thinking. And then was it after the fact that you just kind of like, oh, well, that's fine, it was just my personal thinking, and then move on from there? Or would you in general, like sort of at the moment, like have that insight? Or
Yeah, no, it would really vary, I mean, sometimes I would have I would have this kind of like whole separate dialogue going on in my mind, going on in the background for long periods of time. I mean, and it'd be like I don't know, kind of like that scene at the end of Beautiful Mind when he's talking to his when he's like hallucinating and talking to his the product of his hallucinations. And I don't know if you saw that movie, but anyway, yeah, sometimes sometimes it would just be an ongoing presence in my mental life, in my courtship with Carolyn. It would just kind of like be going on in the background, and I would and I would just proceed. Like it just, it was kind of like an annoyance, but I just no, and I didn't credit it in the same way. It was really like a really big, there were these, there was this one day in my relationship when Carolyn and I were dating where I went from being, so on top of the world in love with Carolyn. Like, we were having such a beautiful day. I think we were in New York and in Manhattan, and we were just taking Manhattan in. It was like exciting and romantic, and I never felt more in love in my whole life. It was so delightful. And then I think it was maybe even like that night we like were in bed and going to sleep, and I was filled, like I had so many fearful thoughts about a relationship and the future, and that was in the span of like a few hours. And the same thing happened to me a couple of years before that around my professional life. Like I woke up and my life seemed like it was in shambles. I mean, my career seemed like it was a disaster, like I was at a dead end, and what had I done wrong? And then I went out for like a paddleboard ride a couple of hours later, and I was like, wow, my career is perfect. Everything is falling into place. It's like amazing. It's a miracle. and to me, these two experiences were really, really enlightening to me. I just started to see like that when things really looked chaotic and bad, like I really, I just need to not pay attention, not pay too much attention to that, not take that very seriously, and kind of stay in the game and stay involved and stay present and keep going and see what comes next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's the difference, because there's, sometimes when the chaotic thinking happens, I guess in an attempt to get quiet, but really what's happening is I'm checking out in a way. So
what are you doing? You're checking out?
Checking out, yeah. So it's that lack of involvement. So
lack of involvement, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think like a lot of people, I don't know about a lot, but I certainly see that happening, that people kind of like check out of the dating experience because they have seemingly one terrible experience after the next, and they're just kind of like, and I'm not saying this is you, by the way, but I have seen this in LA. I see it a lot, like, that people just get really discouraged because it's like one bad apple after the next, and I suspect that experience is due to the fact that it's due to this. It's what I'm talking about, that because they're using their intellect a lot. Their intellect is really good at spotting the flaws in the apple, and that creates bad apples. They're creating bad apples, and that is, they're seeing bad apples, but they're not necessarily bad apples. It's like if you look past that, you would, and this is true, I think, of all, you would see a lot more. Does that make sense, Kristen? Is that responsive to your?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So did I say, is there someone from Ireland? Is that you, Pat? Let's see. Hi, Ireland. That's so awesome.
Hi, I'm sorry it took me a while. I've only managed to get on for the last 15 minutes.
Oh, okay.
My internet was...
Oh, that's okay.
I'm getting the gist. I did have to laugh when the chatter in the background. When you have that chatter in your background, it sort of understanding of an example. If, say, since I've come into the print, well, found out about the principles in September, with my husband and I, we've been together 42 years, but it's definitely been improving. When I stand in that nothing outside of me can, it's me creating my own experience. But then I realised then he's, in a way, I started to notice more about he's coming from his thinking instead of me taking and then maybe reacting, and we'd cause a row together. Yep. So where that understands acting so much, so neither is he. Is this making sense?
Yeah, the part that I heard, because you were kind of coming in and out. Let me.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. You were saying that you began to see that it was your husband was acting from his own thinking, and so it was easier to be understanding towards his responses, just the same way that you would be responding.
Yes.
To your thinking. Yeah.
And also, but when you said about, I'm sorry if this isn't very good. When you said about the back, reminded me how I can still get. Yes. So whereas if he appears to be doing something that's annoying me, so I realised when you said that how I can have that place of peace between that and chatter that is going on that might be saying, oh, the miserable sod, or, something like that. But I'm not engaging in it, but I know it's hanging in the background. But the other part of me is, it was when I know that's been happening, but I actually couldn't, which I know you, but couldn't put words to it. But when you said that chat, I've had that insight, like, oh my God, that's what happens. Because I felt like a bit schizo, because there was 1 minute I'm at me going, oh, you miserable bugger, but I wasn't engaging with that. It was just in the background.
Right.
What you said.
Yeah,
I'm sorry if I've waffled on. It's not.
No. I think that's wonderful that you that you started doing that, and I think that's a really interesting thing about human consciousness is that we can have the most god-awful stuff going on in our thoughts, and it doesn't have to affect our behavior and what we do. And that is a really underestimated, I think, power that we have as human beings. I think it's the reason why people who've been around the principles for a long time don't really care that much what they're thinking, and whether it's crap or positive or negative or positive, and because as our understanding and grounding deepens, we just get so familiar with the fact that thought is just this endless creative process that's happening and changing moment to moment, and it's going up and going down and this left and right, and the contents of it become much less interesting, and we realize that consciousness as a principle, or I don't know what the right word is, but we have a capacity to be present and engaged and loving in life, regardless of the contents of our thought. And regardless of what our thinking is telling us. And that's quite an amazing capability. And it's really important to know that. And that's why, in my, earlier iterations where I was studying psychology and stuff, there was a lot of emphasis on content and analyzing the content of thinking and its origins and its meaning and all of that. And I think that the great insight or the great contribution of Sid Banks and the three principles is that the direction that we want to be looking in is towards the formlessness becoming form continually, and in a fresh way, anew in each moment, and it's looking in that direction that infuses or fills our life with our innate well-being, and like, what a relief, my God. we don't have to but content is so compelling. I mean, it is so compelling. Garrett was on this call a little earlier, but he's just done an amazing job the past few months, really driving this point home to me on his social media and his blogs. And if you haven't discovered Garrett and his work, I strongly recommend that you do so. But anyway, he's really driven home the point to me about, like, content is just really, it's where we get lost as human beings. We get lost in the illusion of form, and get confused by it, when it's not necessary for us to do that, because the next creation is just right behind it, and it's just fresh and new.
And is there anyone else that wants to share anything? Kristen. Oh, I think she was saying goodbye. Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Well, gosh, thank you so much. I'm really grateful that you agreed to do this. I think this time of year, too, is such a great time to share your experience and with relationship, because, many of us are around family who we have a lot of thinking about, and it was great. I had many Me Too moments as you were talking and as participants were sharing. So it was wonderful. Thank you so much. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap it up before I talk about that?
Just want to thank you all for coming and listening and participating. And if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email me about them. I'm more than happy to kind of dialogue with you about it and where you are. And I hope this was even this much useful to you.
Yeah, it was very useful for me, so thank you.
All right.
Yeah, and I will put, when I post this video, the recording onto YouTube, I will put Francesco's website underneath in the section where it explains what he's talking about, so you can get in touch with him through the website. And I want to say that in 2017, the webinars are going to be the second and fourth Thursday of every month. And the first webinar is on the 12th of January with Elsie Spittle. So if you've never heard her speak, or if you have, you probably really want to join in. She's incredible. So thank you all, and hope to see you on the next webinar.
Okay, happy holidays, everyone, and happy New Year to you.
Same to you.
Bye.